To create your My Heart Has Wings, you're going to need to have 2 pieces of clay. One piece slightly bigger than the other piece. The big piece you're going to use to create your heart. The smaller piece, which we'll use second, will be used to create your wings. So since I'm using the second, I'm just going to set it aside, and I'm using my larger piece to create my heart. Now, you have a couple of choices. If you want your heart to be smooth, then you can just go ahead, form it into a sphere, thump it down on your mat, and start pounding. If you want your heart to have a texture, there are tons of textures for you to choose from. So find one that really speaks to you, that you really like the way that it looks. So there's doilies, there's more doilies and burlap. There's even some placemats. There's a wide variety of things that you can use for your texture. I'm going to go with this one. And so once you've got your texture picked out, you're going to need to place it on your mat, and you're going to thump your clay down, and then you're going to start pounding. And when you pound, your goal is to spread your clay out so that it becomes wider. Your goal is to also flatten your clay, and you want it to be about as thick as a cookie. You also want it to be consistently thick, meaning it's the same thickness all the way across. So make sure that you're not just pounding in one area, but that you're trying to keep it even. Once you've pounded it a little bit, it doesn't matter if it's a little bit lumpy, as long as it's for the most part pretty consistent. You'll need to push the heart, paper heart, on there to see if it's big enough for you to trace. It looks like it's just about there. Sometimes what I like to do when I want to spread the clay out a little bit, instead of keeping my fist vertical when I'm pounding, I have my fist go diagonally. I'll check to see if it'll fit. Looks like it's good enough for me, and now I'm ready to peel my texture off my clay, which is the big reveal. Ooh la la. Now I have this amazing texture that I'm going to use for my heart. So where you place your heart is pretty important too. You'll want to decide where you want that texture to show up. Once you've got your heart template placed, and by the way, you don't have to use a heart template. If you want to just wing it or make a different shape heart than this one, you could lightly draw your heart shape onto your clay before cutting it out. And I say lightly just in case you're not happy with what you draw. Or you could just use the template. Totally up to you. I'm going to place this right on top, and I'm going to use the sharp end of my skewer, pressing it all the way through until it hits the mat, and it can stand up perfectly vertical in my clay. I don't want to only go halfway through. I'm trying to slice all the way through the clay. So I'm now dragging my stick. I can feel it scraping the bottom of my clay mat. Sometimes it's a little bit easier to take some of that extra clay off of your stick. It'll help it pull through. Piece of cake. Now I'm going to take all my extra clay because I can use it for something later. I'm going to roll this up. I don't want to leave any clay behind. No clay left behind. Now I have my heart, and I have some edges where the top and the side are coming together that right now the clay is damp, so those edges are not hard. But once this is fired in the kiln, those edges could become sharp. So I just like to take a finger that's a little bit wet, and I'm rubbing my finger on that edge just to smooth it a little bit, just like that. And now that that's finished, before I go any further, I'm going to flip this guy over and write my name on the back. That way I don't get too far along and forget that really important step. There we go. Now that I'm finished with this, my heart is complete. But like I said, if you want to alter or change the shape of your heart, you could always pinch it a little bit, maybe curve it over to the side. Totally up to you. And the great thing about clay is if you do something to your heart that you're not happy with, you ball it back up, roll it back up, and go for it all over again. So that's my favorite thing about clay, is that you can keep on trying. So I'm going to set it aside, and now I'm ready to start on the wings. I want to use a different texture for my wings, so I'm going to switch to this burlap. And now I'm taking that second piece of clay, and I'm going to thump and pound again. So this time my goal was just to kind of flatten the clay, making sure it's about as thick as a cookie, and I'm not going for any particular shape. I'm just going to now peel this off. It's a lot more subtle of a texture than that one, which will be a good contrast. I didn't want them to compete against each other. I wanted one to have more emphasis and the other one not so much. So now that I've got this one, I'm just going to take my skewer and cut it right in half. And now I'm going to use these as my wings. But once again, I've got that edge right there. So I'm just going to take my finger and smooth that out a pinch. There we go, piece of cake. Now I could keep it simple and just have my wings like this, but what's the fun in that? This is where you can really get crazy with your wings. You could use your stick, you could draw, and I'm not going all the way through my clay, I'm just drawing on the surface, and maybe draw some lines that look like feathers. I could even go back to the bottom and maybe scallop the bottom a little bit to make it look even more feather-esque. Totally up to you what you want to do. Again, if you've cut anything out or you see any of these clay boogers, as we like to call them, you need to make sure to smush them down a little bit, because even though it's soft now, it can be very sharp when it comes out of the kiln. So, whoops, I'm pretty happy with the way this wing looks. But you could make your wing look any way you want. And again, if you do something you don't like, smash it and try it again. If you see your neighbor has a much better idea than yours, then that's when you go ahead and borrow ideas from them and try it all over again. So I've got one wing finished. I'm happy with it. I'm going to go ahead, I think, and attach it like this to get it to stay. I can't just place it on the back. I need to use this toothbrush. I'm going to take my toothbrush and I'm scratching into the clay. This is called slipping and scoring. The scratching is scoring, and this watery clay is called slip. I'm gonna set that right there, but just putting it there isn't enough. You need to flip it over and go ahead and smush the two pieces of clay together to get them to attach. And if you accidentally erase your name, just go ahead and write it again. You need to make sure there's a pretty good amount of overlap. You don't want to have just a little bit. If it's just a little bit, when it dries, this wing could break off. So I might need to go ahead and press it a little bit more just to make sure it's not going to come off. And I want to curve my wing shape a little bit. So now that I've got it attached, I can play with it some more. And now I'll do the same thing on the other side. Now, if you're finished, then you can jump right into glazing. If you want to go a little bit further and explore doing different things to your heart with wings, I say go for it. What I plan on doing is one more little thing that's totally optional. I'm going to take a little piece of my extra clay and I'm going to roll it into a small ball. And then I'm going to create what's called a coil, which is a piece of clay that looks like a snake. I made it about as thick as my pinky finger. And now I'm just going to smash that coil really thin. Because I'm attaching this piece to a piece that's already thick enough, this does not have to be as thick as a cookie. So now that I've got this really thin, and if you see any parts where your clay is cracking, just massage a little bit of water into it. I'm going to go ahead, make my edges nice and straight, and make this into a little bit of a scroll. So I'm kind of curling this in. Again, this is just something extra you can do if you want to. So now I've got this cool little scroll that I can put on my heart. Maybe I'll unscroll it a little bit. There we go. And before I place it on there, I think I will write something on the piece of clay with my stick. The tricky part about writing when you're writing with your stick is that the clay tends to come up. It's creating a little bit of a ditch, but that also brings up little bits of clay. So I always try to make sure to pick up any of those little bits as I am writing any words or dragging my stick through the clay. Now, if I'm going to add this to my heart, I will probably need to paint this first. The reason being, if I've got this on here, then it's going to be pretty tricky for me to paint around. So now that I have this piece ready, I'm ready to start adding the glaze. You have a couple of colors to choose from, but don't be fooled by the way the colors look when you see them. Glaze changes colors when it's in the kiln. Glaze has tiny pieces of glass in it. The glass will melt and it will become shiny, but the colors will also become much more vibrant. Right here, they look very pastel. When it's fired in the kiln, the colors will become much more vibrant. So I've got a pink, an orange, and a yellow. Because you're working with clay that's very wet, you want to use your paintbrush, not by pressing back and forth and smushing back and forth, because it'll cause you to lose the details of your clay. So I'm just kind of tapping the glaze into place. The great thing about glaze is you don't have to worry about adding too much. If you add too little, though, your colors might not show up so well. So that's why it's okay to kind of tap that glaze in there pretty thickly. Anything that you don't glaze is going to turn out shiny and white because I will put a clear coat of glaze on top of these. So I want my wings to be bright white. So I'm not going to add any paint or glaze to them at all, knowing that when it's fired in the kiln, it will turn out bright white. If you wanted to add polka dots of other colors, you could totally do that. You might just want to let this dry a little bit because right now the surface is very wet. So now that that's done, I am ready to add this on top. Because this is now very sticky and wet, I'm just going to set it here, and that glaze is also going to act like glue. I'm just going to press it very gently. And I'm finished. I don't plan on adding anything else to mine. So when mine comes out of the kiln, the wings and the scroll will be bright white and shiny. My heart will be a bright pink. If you want to get fancy and add different colors to the different feathers, add dots, add stripes, go for it. I'm just doing the basics. Now what I need to do though is with the dull end of my stick, I'm going to take it and drill 2 holes because I want to have a wire that hangs from one side of my heart to the other. So I'm just going to drill this in. And I'm wiggling it back and forth just to make sure it's going to be big enough. And I'll drill that one in right there. And now this heart's going to need about a week to 2 weeks to dry before it can be fired in the kiln.